The mess hall at the Marine Corps base was buzzing with the usual morning energy. Marines moved quickly through the long lines of food, chatting loudly, some laughing, some focused on their trays. It was a crowded, chaotic place, especially during the lunch hour. Sergeant Emily Hayes, known among her peers for her skill, discipline, and quiet confidence, entered the hall carrying her tray carefully. She was aware of the rush around her, moving steadily between the tables, scanning for an empty spot. Emily had been in the Marines for years, and she knew the unspoken rules of the mess hall. It wasn't just about eating. It was about timing, respect, and keeping order even in the chaos. She moved with purpose, her eyes forward, carefully balancing the tray filled with her meal. She tried not to notice the shoving and bumping that always happened when Marines were in a hurry. But on this day, something unusual happened. A younger Marine, new to the base and unfamiliar with the flow of the mess hall, was trying to squeeze past a crowded table. He was nervous and impatient, worrying about being late for his next assignment. He didn't see Emily in time, and before he could react properly, he accidentally bumped her. Emily stumbled slightly, catching herself, but before she could fully regain her balance, the Marine, frustrated and embarrassed, pushed her a little more roughly than necessary. The mess hall seemed to freeze for a moment. People turned to look, whispers spreading quickly through the crowd. Some were shocked. Shoving a sergeant like that was unthinkable. Others watched with a mix of curiosity and discomfort, unsure if they should intervene. Emily, however, didn't react the way many expected. She didn't shout, didn't push back, and didn't even show visible anger. Instead, she steadied herself, adjusted her tray, and calmly continued walking to her table. Her calmness stood in stark contrast to the chaos around her, and it caught the attention of everyone nearby. Inside, Emily felt a mix of surprise and irritation. Being pushed, especially in public, was never pleasant. But she also knew that showing anger in that moment would not solve anything. It wouldn't teach the young Marine respect, and it certainly wouldn't reflect well on her. She had learned early in her career that true strength often showed itself in moments when others expected a reaction. So she took a deep breath, keeping her face neutral, and focused on reaching her table without drawing more attention. As she walked, she noticed the glances around her. Some Marines were whispering, their heads turning slightly in her direction. She could feel their curiosity, their silent judgment, and perhaps even their admiration. In that brief moment, Emily realized something important. The way she handled herself said more about her than the shove ever could. It was a test of character, and she intended to pass it silently but firmly. The young Marine who had shoved her seemed flustered now, looking around nervously, realizing he had crossed a line. He muttered an apology under his breath, barely audible, and quickly moved away, hoping the incident would be forgotten. But in the mess hall, nothing went unnoticed for long. Even small actions had a way of echoing, and Emily's composed reaction made a louder statement than any words could. By the time Emily reached her table, other Marines were already discussing the incident quietly. Some were frustrated with the young Marine's behavior, while others were more focused on Emily's reaction. Her poise had sparked a quiet respect among her peers. Many of them had seen similar situations escalate into arguments or worse, but Emily's calm approach was different. She didn't need to prove her strength with force. She demonstrated it with restraint. Sitting down, she placed her tray carefully on the table, still maintaining perfect composure. Around her, conversations slowly returned to normal, though the energy in the room had subtly shifted. Marines were more aware of each other, more cautious in their movements. The incident, small as it was, had left a mark. Emily herself reflected for a moment, understanding that moments like these were part of the daily life in the Corps. Respect was earned not just on the battlefield but in these small, often overlooked interactions. As she began eating, Emily noticed a few senior Marines exchanging quiet nods across the room, their eyes lingering on her. They weren't making a scene, but there was a clear recognition of what had happened. In that instant, Emily understood something else. Sometimes the most powerful victories were the ones that required patience, calm, and dignity. She had been pushed, yes, but she had not been defeated. In that crowded mess hall, filled with the clatter of trays and the chatter of Marines, a quiet lesson unfolded. Emily's ability to stay composed under pressure, to control her emotions, and to act with integrity, even in an unexpected confrontation, set her apart. It was a small moment, easily overlooked by anyone not paying attention, but it was a moment that defined her character, and, unknowingly, would soon draw the attention of some very important eyes. After the incident in the mess hall, the atmosphere didn't immediately return to normal. The young Marine who had shoved Emily had retreated to the corner, nervously glancing around as if expecting someone to confront him. His cheeks were red, and his hands trembled slightly as he tried to focus on his own tray, but he couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was watching him. It wasn't just embarrassment he felt. It was the realization that he had crossed a line in front of his peers. Meanwhile, Emily sat calmly at her table, eating quietly, her face composed, but her mind was alert. She was no stranger to challenges, both on and off the battlefield, and she knew that moments like this could be tricky. Some Marines would react with anger or retaliation, while others would ignore the slight completely. Emily, however, understood something crucial. Her reaction would be remembered far longer than the shove itself. She had learned early in her career that control over oneself often spoke louder than words or force. Around her, whispers began to spread. A few younger Marines, still in the mess hall, murmured quietly to each other about what had happened. "Did you see that?" one asked. "She didn't even react," another replied, clearly impressed. Some were in awe, others skeptical, wondering if Emily had just been too polite to respond. But for many, there was no doubt that her calm response had taken courage. Not everyone could hold themselves together under public humiliation, especially in a place where respect was everything. Emily's composure didn't go unnoticed. A few senior enlisted Marines who were sitting nearby had watched the incident unfold. They shared quiet, knowing glances with each other. They had seen many situations escalate quickly, and they could tell immediately that Emily's restraint was not fear or weakness. It was confidence and experience. She had handled herself like a true leader, maintaining authority without a single word of confrontation. The young Marine, still shaken, tried to make himself small and avoid eye contact. He whispered a quiet, almost inaudible apology, hoping that it would be enough. But Emily didn't need the apology to prove anything. She wasn't looking to humiliate him or prove a point. She simply moved on, demonstrating that strength was not always about reacting. Aggressively, it was about self-control and dignity. That lesson, though subtle, was being absorbed by everyone who had witnessed the incident. As the mess hall slowly returned to its usual rhythm, Emily finished her meal. She noticed a few heads turning occasionally, Marines sneaking glances her way. Some younger soldiers were clearly talking about her in hushed tones, trying to figure out who she was and why she had reacted the way she did. Emily didn't mind. She had learned long ago that recognition wasn't something she sought. It was something that came naturally when one acted with integrity. By the end of the lunch period, the story of what had happened had spread quietly among the Marines. Though no one had made an official announcement, word travels fast in the Corps, and Emily's handling of the situation had caught the attention of several people in positions of influence. They admired her patience, her composure, and her ability to remain professional in a situation that could have easily become chaotic. In a culture that prized toughness and assertiveness, her quiet strength was a rare and valuable example. Emily herself reflected on the incident while walking back to her quarters. She knew that this was more than just a small mess hall altercation. It was a test of character, a subtle challenge that revealed how well she could manage herself under pressure. She had faced physical danger and high-stakes missions before, but sometimes the challenges in everyday life could teach just as much. This moment had reminded her, and those watching, that respect was earned not by force or intimidation, but through consistent professionalism and integrity. The young Marine, on the other hand, was left with an important lesson of his own. He realized that his moment of frustration could have caused a serious conflict if Emily had reacted differently. Her restraint had defused a situation that could have easily escalated, and in doing so, she had demonstrated a type of leadership that was both commanding and quiet. Though he didn't yet fully understand the depth of the lesson, he would remember her poise for the rest of his career. Meanwhile, senior officers who were dining elsewhere in the base had started to hear about the incident. Their attention wasn't just on the minor shove. It was on Emily's reaction. They knew immediately that this Marine was someone who handled herself in a way that represented the Corps at its best. Her behavior reflected the values instilled in Marines: honor, courage, and commitment. She had shown that even in everyday situations, those values were not just words, they were lived and demonstrated in action. By the time the day ended, the incident had quietly cemented Emily's reputation. Among her peers and the officers who had heard the story, she was seen as a model of discipline and leadership. Not through loud declarations or heroic actions in battle, but through a simple choice to remain calm, measured, and dignified in the face of disrespect. Emily had turned what could have been a moment of embarrassment into a silent testament to her character. It was clear to everyone who knew about the incident that Emily's story wasn't just about being shoved in a crowded mess hall. It was about the strength of character and the power of restraint. She had made an impact without saying a word, and that impact would only grow as the story of her composure continued to circulate quietly among the ranks. Her actions had become a subtle but powerful example of what it truly meant to be a Marine. While Emily Hayes returned to her duties quietly, the story of what had happened in the mess hall didn't stay contained. Word travels fast on a Marine Corps base, and it often travels faster when it involves someone handling a difficult situation with unexpected poise. Though no one had shouted her praise aloud yet, whispers and quiet conversations began to spread among the ranks. Some Marines told their friends, who told their friends, and soon, the incident was no longer just a small mess hall moment. It had become a point of quiet curiosity across the base. Among those who had noticed Emily's composure were several high-ranking officers who had been dining nearby. They had been observing the usual morning chaos, keeping a watchful eye on discipline, but they hadn't expected to see an incident that demonstrated leadership in such a simple yet powerful way. One of the generals, visiting the base that week, had noticed the young Marine pushing Emily. While it was a minor breach of conduct, it was Emily's reaction that captured attention. She didn't shout, she didn't retaliate, and she didn't allow embarrassment to cloud her judgment. The officers began discussing the situation quietly. "Did you see how she handled that?" one said. Most would have snapped back. "She didn't even flinch." Another nodded, understanding immediately that this was more than a simple act of patience. It was a reflection of her character. They recognized that leadership isn't always about giving orders or showing strength through confrontation. Sometimes, true leadership reveals itself in the way someone handles disrespect or challenges without losing control. Emily herself had no idea that she was becoming the center of attention among the higher ranks. She focused on her responsibilities, moving from task to task with her usual efficiency. But her calm demeanor continued to leave a mark on those who had witnessed it, directly or indirectly. Even the younger Marines who had been shocked by the shove were inspired by how she handled it. Some discussed among themselves how difficult it would have been to remain so composed in a similar situation. Her behavior quietly set a new standard in the mess hall, proof that respect is earned not only through rank, but through conduct and restraint. As the hours passed, stories of Emily's calmness reached senior enlisted leaders who were not in the mess hall that day. They pieced together what had happened from reports and hushed conversations. In their experience, most Marines might react instinctively to a shove, either with words or physical retaliation. Emily's ability to stay composed marked her as someone with rare discipline and self-control. These senior leaders began to mention her name in passing conversations, often with a note of respect. "Did you hear about Sergeant Hayes?" they would ask, clearly impressed by her poise. Meanwhile, the young Marine who had shoved her spent the rest of the day reflecting on his actions. He realized he had made a mistake, but he also noticed that Emily had not treated him harshly or shamed him. Instead, she had demonstrated strength without aggression, a lesson that hit him harder than any reprimand could have. He started to understand that sometimes the quiet response, the controlled, calm reaction, can leave a bigger impression than anger or punishment ever could. In a way, Emily had taught him a lesson about respect and maturity without even speaking. By the end of the day, whispers about Emily's composure had reached the base leadership. Officers discussed her reaction, noting how rare it was to see someone maintain dignity under such circumstances. They acknowledged that moments like these, although small, reveal the true character of a Marine. Leadership and strength aren't always demonstrated in training exercises or combat. They also show themselves in everyday interactions, in moments that test patience and professionalism. Emily herself remained unaware of the growing recognition. She continued her daily routine, performing her duties with the same focus and commitment she had always shown. Yet, unbeknownst to her, the story of the mess hall incident had already begun to influence the culture around her. Junior Marines who had witnessed it were quietly reassessing how they approached others, and senior officers were making mental notes about her character and potential. Her behavior had sent a subtle message. True strength comes not from immediate reactions or intimidation, but from self-control, dignity, and moral courage. The more the story spread, the more Emily's reputation grew quietly among the ranks. What had started as a small, awkward moment had turned into a lesson in leadership for everyone who had heard about it. The generals who had noticed the incident knew that someone like Emily was a rare find, someone who embodied the core values of the Marine Corps without needing recognition or praise. They saw in her the qualities that the Corps valued most: honor, courage, and commitment, demonstrated in everyday life as well as on the battlefield. By the evening, even the younger Marines who had initially been focused on gossip or amusement had developed a newfound respect for Emily. They talked in hushed tones about how she handled the incident, comparing her behavior to what they would have done. Many silently resolved to emulate her composure in their own lives. The story of a shove in the mess hall had transformed into a lesson about patience, restraint, and the quiet power of dignity. In a place where strength is often measured in action, Emily's quiet courage and professionalism had already begun to stand out. Her response had shifted perspectives without a single raised voice. That day, she had shown everyone that leadership is not only about rank or authority, it is about character, how one responds under pressure, and the respect one earns through actions rather than words. And so, the incident that seemed minor to most became something far more significant. Emily had set an example that would ripple through the base, influencing both her peers and the leaders above. Her calmness, observed in a single brief moment, had already begun to write a story about who she truly was. A Marine defined not by a single incident, but by consistent integrity, professionalism, and quiet strength. By the next day, the story of what had happened in the mess hall had traveled far beyond the walls of that crowded dining area. Emily Hayes had returned to her daily duties, focused and professional as always, but her calm reaction to being shoved had already begun to create ripples across the base. Senior enlisted leaders, officers, and even some visiting personnel had heard about the incident, and it sparked conversations that highlighted the difference between someone who simply follows orders and someone who truly embodies the values of the Marine Corps. Reports had reached the battalion commanders, not in the form of complaints, but as quiet mentions of Emily's behavior. A few officers had heard from their subordinates, who spoke of the incident with admiration. "She didn't react the way most would," one said. "She stayed composed. She didn't make a scene. That shows discipline." Another officer agreed, noting that such restraint in the face of disrespect was rare and reflected a level of professionalism that was uncommon, even among seasoned Marines. Emily herself remained unaware of the growing recognition. She went about her daily routine with her usual efficiency, leading her team, checking supplies, and completing her responsibilities without fanfare. To her, the incident in the mess hall had already passed. She didn't seek praise or acknowledgement. That was never her way. But her peers and the higher-ups had seen something remarkable, a demonstration of quiet strength that spoke volumes. The young Marine who had shoved her continued to reflect on his actions. He knew that most people might have expected Emily to lash out or respond angrily, but she hadn't. Instead, she had handled herself with calm authority. This realization left him both humbled and confused. He had learned, perhaps more effectively than any lecture or reprimand could have taught him, that leadership is about how you carry yourself, especially in moments of challenge. Emily's ability to maintain composure under pressure had become a subtle, but unforgettable, lesson for him and many others. Meanwhile, among the senior enlisted leaders, Emily's actions were being discussed as an example of ideal behavior. They spoke in low voices, carefully sharing the story, emphasizing how she had not only avoided conflict, but had also demonstrated a level of dignity that was inspiring. Some even suggested that her actions should be formally acknowledged because, in their eyes, it was the kind of behavior that deserved recognition, not just admiration in whispers. Throughout the base, Emily's story began to serve as a teaching point. Drill instructors and team leaders referenced it when talking about respect and discipline, often using it as a real-life example of how Marines should conduct themselves, both on and off duty. They highlighted her calmness as a strategic strength, explaining that in moments of tension, it's the quiet control and thoughtful response that often make the most lasting impact. Young Marines listened carefully, realizing that courage isn't always measured by physical action. Sometimes it's measured by restraint, integrity, and poise. Emily, however, remained humble. She continued interacting with her peers as she always had, professionally, respectfully, and without any hint of arrogance. Her calm demeanor was genuine. It wasn't performed for recognition or praise. This authenticity made her behavior even more impactful. The fact that she didn't need validation for doing the right thing made the impression on others even stronger. Marines who had witnessed the incident or heard about it began to respect her not just for her rank, but for the character she displayed. The officers who had observed the incident indirectly noted how her actions reflected the core values of the Marine Corps: honor, courage, and commitment. Honor, because she maintained her dignity and respected the chain of command even when confronted with disrespect. Courage, because it takes true bravery to resist reacting instinctively in a challenging situation. And commitment, because she consistently lived these values in everyday life, not just in moments of combat or training. Emily's behavior was quietly making her a role model, and even those who had no direct involvement in the incident could sense her strength. By midweek, the recognition was no longer quiet. Senior leaders began to discuss the possibility of formally acknowledging Emily for her composure. They understood that leadership isn't just about giving orders. It's about inspiring others through example. Emily had done precisely that. Her actions demonstrated that respect can be earned through patience and discipline, and that sometimes the most significant impact comes from quiet moments, rather than grand gestures. Even among her peers, Emily's influence grew. Those who had initially been skeptical of the story began to understand the deeper lesson. They saw that her calm, measured reaction had prevented conflict, maintained professionalism, and subtly set a higher standard for everyone around her. Her peers started to emulate her behavior in their own ways, whether it was staying composed during heated discussions or showing patience in stressful situations. The incident had created a ripple effect, influencing the culture in her unit without anyone realizing it at first. Emily herself was unaware of the larger impact she had made. She didn't change her routine, didn't seek attention, and didn't speak about the incident. Yet, quietly, the recognition of her discipline and composure was growing among those who mattered most, the senior leaders and the Marines who looked up to her. They knew that someone like Emily, who led through example rather than words, was rare, and that her influence would continue to shape the morale and behavior of the unit long after that one incident in the mess hall. By the end of the week, the story of Emily's calmness had become more than just a mess hall moment. It had turned into a symbol of what it meant to embody the values of the Marine Corps. Her restraint, dignity, and quiet authority had not only earned the respect of her peers and superiors, but had also started a ripple effect of inspiration, showing that true leadership is about how you act in the small moments, not just the big ones. The morning started like any other at the base, with Marines rushing through their routines, focused on duties and drills. But Emily Hayes felt a sense of anticipation she couldn't quite explain. She had finished her early inspections and was heading to the mess hall for a quick breakfast when she noticed something unusual. There was a different energy in the room. Conversations had quieted slightly as she entered, and several Marines seemed to glance at her with more attention than usual. She didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just another busy morning. But the moment she stepped fully inside, she realized this was no ordinary day. At the front of the mess hall stood four high-ranking generals, an uncommon sight in such a casual setting. They were talking quietly among themselves, their expressions serious but attentive. Emily's initial reaction was one of surprise. It wasn't every day that four generals appeared without prior announcement, and she could feel the weight of their presence immediately. The room seemed to stretch slightly quieter, with Marines pausing mid-step, trays in hand, their attention drawn toward the unusual gathering. Emily tried to remain calm and composed as always, but a flicker of curiosity ran through her mind. Why were they here? She had no idea yet that this was connected to the incident in the mess hall the previous day. The generals had been briefed on her actions by their subordinates and had taken a personal interest in witnessing her firsthand. In the military, moments like these, where leadership and character are tested, are often rare opportunities for recognition, and Emily was about to experience one without even realizing it. As she approached her usual table, a junior officer intercepted her politely. "Sergeant Hayes, the generals would like to speak with you," he said, motioning toward the front. Emily's heart skipped slightly, though her face remained calm. She nodded and followed the officer, moving toward the generals with measured steps. She kept her posture straight and her expression neutral, as was expected of someone in her rank, but inside she felt a mix of curiosity, surprise, and slight nervousness. When she reached them, the first general, a tall, stern-looking man with decades of service etched into his features, spoke. "Sergeant Hayes," he began, his voice steady and commanding. "We've heard about your actions in the mess hall yesterday." Emily listened quietly, unsure what they would say next. Their praise, though unexpected, was genuine, and she realized that this wasn't a reprimand or a routine check. It was recognition of something far more meaningful. The second general stepped forward, his tone deliberate. "We are here to acknowledge how you handled yourself when faced with disrespect. Most Marines might have reacted immediately, perhaps aggressively or emotionally. But you stayed composed. You demonstrated restraint, dignity, and professionalism. That is the mark of a true Marine." Emily maintained her composure, allowing their words to sink in without breaking her usual calm exterior. Inside, she felt a mixture of humility and pride. She had never acted for recognition, yet here it was, being acknowledged by the highest ranks. The other two generals nodded in agreement, adding their own observations. They spoke about how such composure was rare and how it reflected the values that the Marine Corps strives to instill: honor, courage, and commitment. Emily had lived those values every day, but to hear it spoken aloud by four of the most senior officers on the base was a moment that left her quietly stunned. She realized that her behavior, which had seemed small and ordinary to her, had made a lasting impression on leaders who understood the importance of character in a Marine. As the conversation continued, Emily noticed that some of her peers were observing quietly from a distance. Their expressions reflected a mixture of surprise and admiration. Many had witnessed the incident yesterday and had already respected her restraint, but seeing the generals acknowledge her personally amplified that respect. It became clear that her actions were being recognized not just as a momentary display of patience, but as a defining example of leadership and professionalism. The generals then explained why they had come personally. They wanted to ensure that Emily's example was formally recognized and that her story would be shared as a model for others. In the military, recognition from high-ranking officers is rare and meaningful, and this was an acknowledgement not just of rank but of character. Emily felt a quiet warmth in her chest, a combination of humility and satisfaction, as she realized the impact of her behavior. After a few moments of conversation, the generals invited Emily to a short formal gathering later in the day, where she would be publicly honored. This was unusual, especially in a mess hall setting, but it was a deliberate choice to emphasize that leadership is demonstrated in everyday moments, not just in battles or ceremonies. Emily accepted, maintaining her calm demeanor, though her mind raced with thoughts about the honor and responsibility being entrusted to her. As she stepped back to return to her breakfast, she noticed the young Marine who had shoved her the previous day. He was standing quietly at a distance, watching the interaction unfold. Their eyes met briefly, and in that silent moment, He understood the depth of her impact. He had learned a lesson in respect, humility, and leadership that words could never fully convey. By the time Emily finished her meal, it was clear that the atmosphere in the mess hall had shifted. Marines moved with a little more awareness, conversations were quieter, and a subtle respect for conduct and professionalism had settled over the room. The appearance of the generals had turned a simple morning into a defining moment, not only for Emily but for everyone present. What started as a minor incident, a push in a crowded mess hall, had transformed into a story of recognition, character, and leadership. Emily Hayes had demonstrated that true strength is often quiet, measured, and dignified, and now it was being acknowledged in a way that few Marines ever experience. That day marked the beginning of a moment that would not only honor her but also inspire those around her, showing that sometimes, the smallest acts of composure can have the largest impact. Later that day, the mess hall had a different atmosphere than usual. Word had spread that the generals were going to honor Sergeant Emily Hayes personally, and the Marines inside could feel the tension and excitement. Conversations were quieter, and everyone seemed aware that something important was about to happen. Emily herself moved with calm efficiency, carrying herself as she always did, but inside, she felt a mix of nerves and humility. She had never sought recognition for her actions. She simply did what she believed was right. Yet now, she was about to receive acknowledgement from the highest-ranking officers she had ever seen in person. The 4 generals were standing near the front of the room, their expressions serious but kind. When Emily approached, the tallest of the generals stepped forward first. "Sergeant Hayes," he began, his voice steady and commanding, "we have watched you carefully. Yesterday, in the mess hall, you were pushed by a junior Marine. Most Marines might have reacted impulsively, perhaps with anger or confrontation. But you maintained your composure. You showed discipline, respect, and professionalism. That is what makes a Marine truly exceptional." Emily listened quietly, keeping her posture straight and her face calm. But inside, a warmth spread through her chest. She felt proud, not for herself, but because the qualities she valued, discipline, patience, and dignity, were being recognized. She had acted the way she thought was right, and now that choice was being honored. It was a rare and powerful moment, the kind that Marines dream of, where the values they live by are noticed and appreciated by those in the highest positions of command. The second general spoke next, his tone deliberate and serious. "Your ability to remain calm under pressure, to show restraint instead of retaliation, reflects the very principles of the Marine Corps. Honor, courage, and commitment are not just words in a handbook. They are demonstrated through actions. And you, Sergeant Hayes, demonstrated them beautifully yesterday." He paused, letting his words sink in. Around the room, Marines who had witnessed the incident, or had only heard about it, watched with admiration. Emily's calm strength was no longer just a private quality. It had become an example for everyone present. The third general, who had been observing quietly, added, "Leadership is not always about giving orders. Leadership is also about how you respond in moments of challenge. Your actions inspired not only your peers but also your superiors. You handled yourself with dignity, and in doing so, you have set a standard for everyone around you." Emily nodded silently. She didn't need to speak. Her actions and composure spoke louder than words ever could. She had earned respect not through force or authority, but through the quiet power of self-control and integrity. Finally, the 4th general stepped forward. His voice was softer but no less commanding. "This commendation is not just for a single act. It is recognition of your character, which has been demonstrated consistently over time. Yesterday was the moment that brought it to light for all to see. You are being honored because you embody what it truly means to be a Marine. You have shown that strength is not measured by aggression, but by restraint, dignity, and courage." As the generals presented her with a formal commendation, Emily felt a mixture of pride and humility. She had never imagined that a simple incident in the mess hall could lead to such recognition. The Marines around her watched quietly, some whispering among themselves, others simply observing in awe. Many of them had been inspired by her actions the day before, but seeing the generals formally acknowledge her elevated the incident to something legendary within the base. Emily's peers noticed the young Marine who had pushed her yesterday standing quietly at the side. His expression had changed. He looked reflective and humbled, understanding the depth of Emily's character. He realized that she had taught him a lesson about respect, professionalism, and leadership without saying a single word. Her calm response had left a far greater impression than anger or confrontation ever could have. After receiving the commendation, Emily was invited to speak briefly. She thanked the generals respectfully, acknowledging the honor but redirecting attention to the importance of teamwork, discipline, and respect in the Corps. Her words were simple, heartfelt, and humble, showing that she understood the gravity of the recognition but did not let it inflate her ego. The generals nodded approvingly, recognizing not only her actions but also her humility, another key quality of leadership. By the end of the ceremony, it was clear to everyone present that Emily Hayes had made a lasting impact. Her actions had demonstrated that leadership is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes the most powerful form of leadership is quiet, steady, and disciplined. She had turned a moment that could have been humiliating into an example of courage and professionalism, and her recognition by the generals made that lesson clear to all Marines present. Even after the ceremony, conversations among the Marines reflected the impression Emily had made. Junior Marines spoke of her as a model of composure and integrity, while senior officers discussed her actions as a rare example of true leadership in everyday life. The story of her restraint in the mess hall became more than a single incident. It became a teaching point, a symbol of what it meant to be a Marine who leads by example. For Emily, the honor was not just about the commendation itself. It was a reminder that living by one's values, even in small moments, matters. That day, she had been recognized not only for handling a difficult situation with grace, but also for inspiring others to strive for the same standard. The quiet dignity with which she had faced the incident had transformed her into a role model, and the impact of that moment would resonate through her unit for months to come. By the time Emily returned to her routine, the mess hall felt different. Marines moved with more awareness and respect. Conversations carried an undertone of professionalism, and Emily's presence served as a reminder of the power of composure and character. A small shove had sparked a chain of events that highlighted the essence of leadership, proving that true honor often comes from how one handles everyday challenges. After the ceremony with the generals, the atmosphere at the base had subtly shifted. Marines went about their duties, but there was a quiet awareness among them, a recognition that leadership and respect were about far more than rank or authority. Emily Hayes had been honored not only for what she had done in that single moment but also for the example she had set for everyone who had witnessed it. Her calm, disciplined response to being shoved had become a lesson in character, quietly teaching others what it truly meant to embody the values of the Marine Corps. Word of Emily's recognition traveled quickly among the units. Junior Marines who had been present during the mess hall incident recounted what had happened, often with a sense of admiration. "Did you see how she handled it?" one would whisper to another. "Most of us would have lost our cool," another would respond. The story of her restraint became a benchmark for what Marines could strive for, not just in training or combat, but in everyday interactions. People began to talk less about the shove itself and more about how Emily had handled it with dignity and composure. Drill instructors and team leaders started to use Emily's example as a teaching point. During briefings, they would recount the incident, emphasizing the importance of patience, professionalism, and respect. They explained that leadership wasn't just about giving orders or showing strength. It was also about how one responds to challenges, especially unexpected ones. Emily's actions became a quiet but powerful lesson. Restraint and calmness under pressure often speak louder than aggression or anger. Emily's story also reached Marines who hadn't been present during the incident. They heard about her recognition from their peers and from officers, and it quickly spread across the base. The lesson was clear. Strength isn't always measured by physical ability or authority. Sometimes, strength is measured by patience, self-control, and the ability to remain composed when provoked. Emily's example showed that leadership could be demonstrated through everyday actions, not just in high-stakes missions or dramatic moments. Even the young Marine who had pushed her the day before was affected by what happened. He had been watching quietly during the ceremony and had observed how Emily accepted the recognition with humility. For him, it was a powerful lesson in respect and character. He realized that she had taught him more through her actions than any lecture or punishment ever could have. Emily's calm response had left a lasting impression on him, and he began to approach his own interactions with more awareness and maturity. Among the senior enlisted leaders and officers, Emily's behavior continued to be discussed as a rare example of professionalism. They recognized that her calmness and dignity were not just personal traits. They were qualities that influenced everyone around her. Marines at all levels began to emulate her behavior, whether consciously or unconsciously. Junior Marines learned to pause and think before reacting, while senior Marines reflected on how their own actions set examples for others. Emily's influence was spreading quietly but powerfully, shaping the culture of the unit in a way that few formal lessons could achieve. The general's recognition of Emily also served as a reminder that leadership in the military is multifaceted. It isn't always about who commands the largest group or leads the most complex operation. Sometimes, it's about who demonstrates integrity, humility, and calmness in small but significant moments. Emily had shown that a single act of composed behavior could resonate far beyond the immediate incident, affecting peers, subordinates, and superiors alike. The recognition she received reinforced the idea that values and character are just as important as skill and authority in defining a Marine's leadership. Emily herself remained humble throughout all of this. She continued to perform her duties with the same focus and professionalism as before. She didn't let recognition change her approach or her attitude. Her behavior was authentic, and that authenticity made the lesson she had taught even stronger. Marines respected her not just because she had been honored by the generals, but because she had earned that respect through consistent action and integrity. She showed that true leadership doesn't seek applause, it inspires it naturally through example. As days turned into weeks, Emily's story became a reference point for discussions about respect, discipline, and leadership across the base. Her example reminded Marines that small moments, like handling a shove in a mess hall, can reveal a person's true character. Leadership is not only about big missions or heroic acts. It is also about how you treat others, how you manage yourself under pressure, and how your actions influence those around you. Emily's calm and composed behavior had become a benchmark for what a Marine should strive to be, and it was quietly reshaping the culture in her unit. By this time, the young Marine who had shoved her began to approach Emily differently. He was more respectful and attentive, understanding the power of her example. Other Marines also started to notice how meaningful small acts of restraint could be. Emily's story became a lesson in real-life leadership. Sometimes, the most impactful actions are not loud or dramatic, but quiet, thoughtful, and consistent. Her example inspired not only admiration but also reflection, encouraging Marines to hold themselves to a higher standard. In essence, Emily's actions had gone far beyond a single incident. They had created a ripple effect, influencing peers, shaping unit culture, and teaching a valuable lesson about the true meaning of leadership. Her calmness, professionalism, and dignity had shown that respect and authority are earned not just by rank or force, but by character and example. The lesson she had taught would continue to resonate long after the event itself, leaving a legacy of quiet strength and inspiring others to follow her lead. Months had passed since the incident in the mess hall, but the impact of that single moment still resonated throughout the base. Sergeant Emily Hayes had returned to her daily routine, continuing to perform her duties with the same professionalism, discipline, and calm demeanor that had first caught the attention of her peers and superiors. Yet, the story of her composure and dignity had become a part of the culture, quietly influencing Marines at every level. It was a reminder that small actions often have far-reaching consequences. Even though Emily herself remained humble, her peers and subordinates viewed her differently. The quiet authority she had displayed had left a lasting impression on everyone who had witnessed it. Marines began to treat each other with more respect, realizing that moments of frustration or impatience could be handled with composure rather than aggression. Emily's behavior had become a benchmark, a real-life example that rank alone does not earn respect. It is the way one carries oneself that truly matters. The young Marine who had accidentally pushed her that day had also changed. He approached Emily differently now, more respectfully and thoughtfully. He had learned an important lesson in humility and patience. The brief moment of confrontation, which could have ended in anger and resentment, instead became a powerful teaching moment. By observing Emily's restraint, he understood that leadership and strength are shown not only through rank or action, but through self-control and character. This lesson stayed with him and shaped how he approached his own career in the Corps. Among the senior leaders, Emily's example continued to be recognized as exceptional. Officers discussed the incident as a rare demonstration of true Marine values in everyday life. They praised her ability to turn what could have been a negative moment into a display of professionalism and integrity. Some even used her example when mentoring other Marines, showing that leadership is demonstrated not only in training exercises or combat situations but also in small, seemingly ordinary moments. Emily had shown that the principles of honor, courage, and commitment are lived every day, not just in high-profile missions. The story of Emily's composure also had a ripple effect on the culture of the unit. Marines began to emulate her behavior in their own ways, whether it was staying calm during stressful situations, treating others with respect even under provocation, or quietly leading by example without seeking recognition. Her actions demonstrated that leadership could be subtle yet incredibly powerful. It wasn't about who gave the loudest orders or completed the most impressive missions. It was about the quiet strength that earned trust, admiration, and respect over time. Emily herself remained grounded. She never boasted about the commendation from the generals or the attention her actions had brought. She continued to mentor younger Marines, guiding them with patience and understanding, showing them how to maintain dignity in difficult situations. Her influence grew not because she demanded it, but because she inspired it naturally. Her peers and subordinates looked up to her not just for her rank, but for the way she exemplified the values of the Corps every day. The generals who had recognized her that day continued to view her as a model Marine. They used her example to illustrate the importance of character in leadership discussions and briefings. They emphasized that heroism is not only demonstrated on the battlefield but also in everyday interactions, in the choices Marines make when no one is watching or when the situation could easily lead to conflict. Emily's actions had become a lesson in integrity, humility, and the quiet power of composure, inspiring both current and future Marines. Even long after the incident, Emily's story was shared in quiet conversations, training sessions, and mentorship discussions. Her calm response to being shoved had become a memorable teaching point, a story that illustrated the true meaning of respect and professionalism. It reminded Marines that leadership is not about reacting impulsively, but about maintaining control, demonstrating integrity, and influencing others through example. What seemed like a small moment had grown into a significant lesson that would shape the culture and mindset of the unit for years to come. For Emily, the lasting legacy of that day was not the commendation itself, but the subtle changes she had inspired in those around her. Her actions had shown that a single choice, how to respond to disrespect or challenge, can have profound consequences. The respect she earned was a reflection of her character, not the recognition she received. Her story became a quiet legend among her peers, a reminder that courage and leadership come in many forms, and that sometimes the smallest moments reveal the greatest strength. The young Marine, her peers, and even the senior officers continued to reflect on what they had witnessed. They realized that Emily's restraint had not only diffused a tense moment but also provided a lasting lesson in professionalism, patience, and integrity. She had shown that leadership is not always about action or force. It is about example, influence, and character. Her impact was subtle but undeniable, a reminder that the values of the Marine Corps are lived in every choice, every interaction, and every decision. In the end, the incident that began with a shove in a crowded mess hall had grown into a story of respect, dignity, and leadership. Emily Hayes had turned a potentially negative moment into a lasting inspiration, teaching others that true strength lies in composure, integrity, and the ability to lead by example. Her legacy was not written in medals or ceremonies alone, but but in the hearts and minds of the Marines she had inspired. Her story became a lasting testament to the power of character, showing that real heroes are often defined not by what they do in moments of drama, but by how they act with dignity and courage when it matters most.